Well, angels have made good characters for television and Hollywood movies ever since those tiny screens and big screens appeared before us. Perhaps you remember Clarence Oddbody, the guardian angel in training who earned his wings in Bedford Falls, watching over old George Bailey. Or maybe the angel you remember is Jonathan Smith, played by Michael Landon on Highway to Heaven in the 1980s. Or perhaps you're old enough to remember Tess and Monica and Andrew, the angels that you saw on a decade-long series in the 1990s known as Touched by an Angel. But before the 2000s, most angels were depicted as full of light and life. Can't say that about the new millennium. But 20 years ago and beyond, angels in film and television were all about helping people in trouble and helping us find grace in our midst. So hopefully what you heard, if you could hear the dialogue in that clip, is that Monica, the angel in training, her next assignment is Pete, and Pete is homeless, living in his van. She, in between, because I can't show you the 38-minute episode, in between, she encounters Pete, talks to him, he talks about he's got a job, he's heading to Colorado, and that's what he's doing and all that. And so she just figures Pete's going to be just fine. He's going to do just fine. And Tess, the angel supervisor, I guess you would call her in the series, says that he has his pride, but he's been kicked so many times. He's been beat so many times down by whatever's happened in his life. The next time might be it. Might be all he can take. And she says to him, Monica at the end, his pride's not going to help, neither is yours. Neither is yours. Well, Touched by an Angel began its run in 1994, and the scene we just saw appeared toward the end of the first season. The episode took on the issue of homelessness, with Monica, a new angel played by Roma Downey, had to endure the same difficulties as her assignment Pete. Along the way, she meets other people, making the best of living on the streets, and I hope these clips have better sound, but Sophie, a senior citizen traumatized by the assassination of JFK and obsessed with conspiracy theories, and Zach, a Desert Storm veteran suffering from PTSD. The conversation continues. Zach has had a nightmare, and they're in a homeless shelter now. The temperature had dropped to a certain degree, and the shelter opened up, and so Zach and Pete are in this shelter, and as Zach is waking from, he wakes up Zach from the nightmare that he's having. He describes the scene of being in the desert. He's covered by sand. There's mines all around him. Nobody knows where the mines are. He can't move. He's trapped. He's back at Desert Storm. And he's living all of that over again in his dreams and in his nightmares. And so Pete talks to him about, you need new dreams. You gotta start dreaming about a future and not dreaming about the past. And it's easy for us to say that PTSD is a very serious disorder that affects a lot of people, not only veterans, but in particularly a huge percentage of veterans who return to civilian life. In another scene in the episode, Zach talks about 1 minute I'm eating sand and I'm watching what I'm doing, killing other people that I've never met, don't know anything about, and the next minute I'm home eating a Big Mac. And he said, that's just crazy. That's just crazy. Trauma is the most common factor in why persons are homeless in our nation. Trauma from child abuse or neglect, acts of violence that were perpetrated against them or that they witnessed. War, accidents, social embarrassments, and more. All different kinds of trauma influence and impact the lives of human beings. And some of that trauma becomes post-traumatic stress disorder and leads to homelessness. That's perhaps part of the reason that we tend to think of angels as protectors. From the 91st Psalm, we read, "For God will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways. On their hands they will bear you up, so that you will not dash your foot against a stone." The ancients knew a thing or two about trauma. Living generation after generation under the tyrannical regimes of empires and kings who enacted terror as their means of peacemaking. And when your whole world is filled with terror and violence, your image of God may be that of a commander of a great army of angels, supernatural warriors, to fight the powers you can't stand alone against. The archangel Michael comes to mind here. But as was revealed in Jesus, and that's what Epiphany is all about, Jesus revealing God who doesn't choose to fight our battles for us. When tempted to test the guardian angels of the psalmist, Jesus denies the temptation to call upon any army, heavenly or human, defies the violent norm of the world's understanding of power, and changes the way we understand the holy in our midst. Jesus didn't sit around chatting with angelic beings all day. But he did feed the hungry. He did heal the sick. He did set those free who were imprisoned by blindness and social exile. None of whom were perfect, by the way, or without sin. All had made mistakes. All had made bad choices. All had suffered traumas that were unspeakable in their lives. And each one he treated as holy. Each one he treated as holy, as if they were angels themselves. The writer to the Hebrews perhaps caught this best when in the chapter before those short two verses we heard this morning, the writer says, "Pursue peace with everyone and the holiness without which no one will see the Lord. See to it that no one fails to obtain the grace of God, that no root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble, and through it many become defiled. Let mutual love continue. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing that some have entertained angels without even knowing it." It's far easier for us to be like the contractor earlier in the episode of Touched by an Angel, who stopped and asked Pete what kind of work does he do, and Pete said, "Well, almost anything." And he says, "Well, good, I'm a carpet layer and I need somebody to help me stretch carpet." And Pete says, "I can't do that because my knees are just shot." And the guy says, "Well, did you ever think it's probably that attitude that caused your homelessness in the first place?" It's far easier us to be like that contractor, filled with judgment, especially if those struggling don't fit our image of how a person in their circumstances should or should not act. Over the past 2 weeks, I've met a young man. I'll call him Johnny to protect his name. Johnny came to our pad shelter about the very first night and has been at our shelter each of the nights that we've had it open. Johnny's a probably 30-year-old guy, maybe 30. Probably CJ's age. Probably about your age, CJ. And Johnny needs a kidney transplant. Johnny's on dialysis 3 days a week. Has a shunt in his arm. Can't lift more than 15, 25 pounds to protect that shunt in his arm. Has doctors, they're up north. Can't continue to make all of his appointments because he doesn't have transportation. Has some other issues along the way. And yet somebody, somewhere, I guarantee it, will say to him, why don't you just get off your lazy you-know-what and get a job? What's wrong with you? Can't you work like everybody else? Johnny didn't ask for kidney failure. He's not a recovering alcoholic who tore up his liver or kidneys. This just happened. It's part of who he is. And it's landed him on the streets. And by the grace of God, he's not freezing tonight, because he can come here and he can get a warm meal. Pulled pork, macaroni and cheese, some coleslaw, some desserts. And he gets a warm place to sleep. Breakfast in the morning. It's easier for us to be that person in the van to say, well, didn't you ever think that maybe your attitude is what caused you to be there? Certainly, some people who are homeless and struggling have made choices that have landed them where they are. And many haven't had a choice at all. If we knew the full story, we may be able to find grace in that moment instead of judgment. We may be able to find ourselves in the presence of the holy. So this clip that I was going to show you was of Pete telling his new family, if you will, that he's found around a barrel that they've lit on fire to stay warm before the shelter would open. Pete tells his story, how he came to be in the van which in another part of the episode is towed away because the owner of the building in front of it is mad that it's in back of his building and has it towed away from him. And that's how he ends up in the homeless shelter. And the van broke down. He was on his way from the East Coast to Colorado. I think this is supposed to take place in Chicago. But his van broke down. He was on his way because he had a purpose. You see, a few years ago, before this time in the episode, when some things happened in the economy, his business started to fail. He was a contractor. And as the business started to fail, so did the bills start to pile up. And he had to choose some things over others, and he chose to pay his mortgage over his health insurance. And then his wife, Julie, got sick. Really sick. With cancer. And a year before, he meets Monica and Zach and Sophie. She died. He lost the house. And all he had left was her urn, with her name engraved and her cremains inside. And he had promised her, they had made a promise that they would go to Colorado together. And when she was sick, that you would take my ashes to the mountains and let me go there. And on his way, the van breaks down, and he's doing everything he can to try to fix the van to get to Colorado. And he says, you know, she got me off booze because I was an alcoholic. But the moment she said, yes, I'll marry you, my life changed forever. and he hadn't had a drink since. Well, as the episode comes to a close, Monica approaches him after somebody had stolen away his urn and reveals herself as an angel of God. And Pete is able to come back to where he needed to be. And Zach, his only prized possession in the world was his Marine ring, decided when he found out who stole the urn to hawk that ring for that urn and gives it back to Pete. If there's anything I've ever learned about people struggling and in poverty, they'll give the shirt off their back for one another in ways that we can't imagine. It has a happy ending. He gets out to Colorado. He gets to spread her ashes. That's how Touched by an Angel works. It's not how the world often works. Friends, we're made in the image of God. We are all made to be holy. Let that sink in for a second. We're made in the image of God. We are all made to be holy, to be blessed, and to be a blessing. Whenever one of us is suffering, we all suffer. For the fullness of our humanity is found in our shared experience. Our holiness is revealed in our empathy for one another. And our empathy is rooted in our mutual love for one another. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing so, some have entertained angels without even knowing.